What is the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a Michigan offense, like a classic Michigan football offense? Now, I really want to open this video up with that question because I'm curious as to where you guys will go with this one. And feel free to take a second, think about it. Maybe you want to bring up the first name that comes to mind, or a group of names, or some certain, adjectives to describe the classic, example of a Michigan football offense. For me personally, and I think most of you guys would agree, it's a matter of downhill running, blue collar mentality, old school college football. We're going to run between the tackles and run between the tackles and run between the tackles. And maybe we'll get a little fancy with it and throw some play action passes in there, here and there, to, get you off your game, get you off your feet, and remind you that we do also have a passing attack and largely win games by taking the air out of the football, controlling the game, and giving you a slow, painful death. Names like Tim Biakabatuka and Hassan Haskins come to mind for me personally. Probably two of the greatest running back performances against Ohio State that we'll ever see. Biakabatuka back in the 90s. I believe it was 94 or 95. I can't quite remember. I was 4 and 5 years old at the time, so you'll have to excuse me on that one. And then Hassan Haskins, of course, in 2021. And let's also not forget about Blake Corum's huge 6'5" run in honor of his buddy Zach Zinter in 2023 to pretty much seal the game against Ohio State. Those are kind of the first things that come to mind, right? You might also think of, some of those odd years that we personally on this channel like to try to memory hole with Rich Rodriguez and Brady Hoke and such, some of the shoelace years. And we also think of some high-powered offensive players. We think of Braylon Edwards. We think of Donovan Peoples-Jones. We think of some of those guys. We think of Jake Butt. There were some pass catchers that came through the years, over the years in Michigan football history. But largely it's a team, and especially under the Harbaugh years, and Sharon Moore tried to, continue this trend, tried to model this, but woefully failed at it. Michigan has been closer to Iowa than peak Miami or, the heyday of the spread offenses throwing the football over the field. They've been closer to Iowa than they have been 2019 LSU. I think that's fair to say. But Michigan in this upcoming season, I think, has found the perfect fit for their offensive coordinator to honor those kind of traditions, that philosophy, stay true to that identity of physicality, running the football, controlling the game, everything that we like to see from our team, while also doing some things in a very modern way that I think personally can open this offense up and make this a top 10 unit. I really think that. I really think Michigan's offense in 2026 can be a borderline elite unit. And if you just look at it, you try to take the bias out of it. You try to forget about the fact that it's Michigan, and you try to take the branding out of it, and you try to just look at it as objectively as possible. You go through all the position groups. Well, any analyst out there who is an unbiased observer of this team, who's neither a Michigan fan or an Ohio State fan, on all the channels I've watched and different articles I've read and things I've looked up, they all rate nearly every position group in this offense as at least a B to a B plus, if not an A. Offensive line, wide receiver, tight end, running back especially, as this might be one of the better running back units in the Big Ten. And well, when you pair all that talent with a massive coaching upgrade in Jason Beck as the main offensive coordinator for this team, an offensive coordinator, by the way, who last season had Utah's offense with Devin Dampier at quarterback, had them at the end of the season ranked 6th in offensive SP+, 7th in adjusted EPA per play, 12th in success rate, and 19th in yards per play. Most all of those metrics I just gave you being opponent adjusted metrics, by the way. Some of you may be saying, well, it was Utah. They played a weak Big 12 schedule. Well, adjusted EPA per play, offensive SP plus, and a lot of those I just listed, success rate, are all opponent adjusted. So consider that for a second. Jason Beck was one of the best hires of the entire offseason. And in this video, I want to explain exactly why he's such a great fit for Michigan football in 2026 and what to expect from this offense overall. Because I think it's ultimately one thing to, highlight the sheer amount of talent this offense will have and to maybe make some points about Jason Beck's offensive scheme. But it's another thing, and this is really what I want to do for you guys in this video. I want to explain exactly how that talent fits so well into his scheme, and I want to kind of detail exactly what to expect, again, from this offense and what to look for. This is going to be kind of a video that I hope, if I'm doing what I hope to set out to do, if I accomplish what I want to do in this video, my main goal for this video, it's to provide you guys with some information that maybe you can take to the water cooler or, the meeting room or conference room at work tomorrow and kind of be able to flex your football knowledge in front of your coworkers or maybe your friends out on the golf course or, while you're going out camping or whatever you may be doing. Jason Beck, again, like I said, is a great fit for this team, and it's largely due to the philosophy and kind of the bigger picture things, like I detailed kind of a minute ago, and I don't want to kind of spend too much time on this, but what stood out to me in reviewing the film of his offense from last season at Utah was it was a perfect combination of toughness and finesse. And I really think that in this current meta game, by the way, in the meta of college football right now, that's what you really need to win games. We've detailed it before, even the Ryan Days and some of the spread guys out there in the college football world are running a little bit more heavy personnel, are trying to run between the tackles a little bit more, are trying to kind of control the clock and manage games more. And you're seeing less and less of these kind of pure finesse offenses, these pure finesse up-tempo, spread you out constantly offenses having success. But you're also seeing less of the teams that just line up in straight, I formation time and time again, or with like a single back and classic, under center stuff and running the old waggle offenses, the old run, stretch again, and then call like play action waggle or some kind of PA bootleg play, and that's basically your entire offense, like the Iowas of the world. Everyone's becoming much more multiple, and I think that's an answer to what most college defenses are doing. You need to have that blend of both physicality and willingness to run between the tackles and play a more physical game. And you also need to be able to spread things out and stretch the field a bit. You need to be able to do both in college football. And let's be honest, that's what we've seen from the most successful teams in college football in previous seasons. Georgia was able to do it with like the Stetson Bennett offense, where they tossed the ball around a good bit and would spread you out in like 4 wide, but they'd also, of course, try to run the football. Kirby Smart is very big on physicality. Kurt Cignetti at Indiana this past season ran a lot of spread stuff and a lot of RPO stuff, but they also ran between the tackles and ran, inside zone and duo and gap scheme stuff with Roman Hemby quite a bit. And you also see it with guys like Dan Lanning at Oregon and so on and so forth. It's a great combination of toughness and finesse in this offensive system as well. Jason Beck will call a lot of those spread formations, but also importantly to note, Utah last season, believe it or not, more than any other college football team, and I'm talking about all 130 something, whatever it is, college football teams at the FBS level that we have now, or is it 120 something? I honestly don't even really keep track. They ran bonus OL formations more than any college football team last season. They ran a 6th offensive lineman. They had a fullback that weighed 300 pounds that they ran in there very, very frequently. They got into power formations. They put their quarterback under center as well. And with Michigan's personnel, with Bryce Underwood, with also having Jordan Marshall, Zach Marshall, Hogan Hansen, multiple tight ends you can go to, a running back that you can depend on either out of the eye or out of shotgun formation. That's a thing we don't really talk about much in modern college football. A lot of running backs these days, they don't really know how to run out of, the backfield, like truly out of the backfield and not merely out of the shotgun formation as well anymore. There's a slight difference in technique when you're running from behind the quarterback and standing next to the quarterback. Most of these guys these days, they just know how to play out a shotgun. But Jordan Marshall, interestingly enough, is one of the few running backs who really has that vision and that ability to get the ball at that different kind of exchange point that you do when you're running out of single back formation. So Jason Beck is really equipped with personnel that can allow him to do a lot of different things. And speaking of the many different things that he will do in this offense, he's going to use Bryce Underwood's legs. I don't think it's any secret. They've mentioned it in interviews. They've mentioned it. Kyle Wittingham's mentioned it. Players have mentioned it. Bryce Underwood himself has mentioned it. Jason Beck's going to run Bryce Underwood. Now, the extent to which he does, the frequency in which he does, whether he does it in big games a lot of that's, that will remain to be seen. But this is a fact. And I don't think I'm breaking any news on this. In fact, it's something a lot of channels have highlighted. A lot of people across, YouTube and college football content generally have mentioned. But I think when you look at it a little deeper, there's a little more to analyze there, because it's not just the fact that Beck will use Bryce Underwood's legs. I think sometimes people forget there's a lot of different ways in which you can use an athletic, running quarterback. Some coaches are going to try to get their quarterbacks out into space. We saw this with like Rich Rod and eventually Brady Hoke with Shoelace back in the day. You see this with, some of the more modern offenses where they try to stretch things out and they're just going to run zone read, or they're just going to run the quarterback off tackle in some way to try to get him out into space. That's not necessarily what Jason Beck's going to do. And I think that fits Bryce Underwood's ability to a T. Watching the film on Utah's offense last season, Devin Dampier was running a lot of what you call midline read, a lot of arc read, and a lot of quarterback power, even quarterback counter. Basically kind of gap scheme based plays with pulling guards and pulling tackles and inserting fullbacks into, the gap to try to create a gap like you would with a running back, but instead with the quarterback. And what that really does is, of course, evens the numbers out in the box. You don't have to use your quarterback as just basically a wasted player on the play just to hand the football off to the running back. And then you have what you call a 10-on-11 run game. Instead, you got the quarterback running the ball, and the running back can even get involved trying to throw a block or trying to misdirect a linebacker out of a gap like you would have on, a zone read play or a midline read in this case. What I'm saying is the specific way in which Jason Beck likes to run his quarterback fits the kind of power running style that we saw Bryce Underwood do a lot of in high school, and unfortunately the coaching staff last year didn't take advantage of. So when we look at it a little bit deeper, it makes perfect sense why we should all be excited for Jason Beck as the offensive coordinator at the University of Michigan this next season. The next point I wanted to hit on too, speaking of Bryce Underwood, is the simplicity that we see in the passing game. I think quarterbacks like Bryce, who spent a lot of time running the football and not as much time throwing the football in high school. If you go back and watch his high school tape, he did throw the football a bit, but he was mostly a running quarterback for a reason. He was the only guy on the field who was, 6'4", 200 something pounds and can run a 4.40 40 in any given high school game that he played. So why wouldn't you run him over and over and over again? But the cannon of an arm that he has and the good release that he has and the future NFL arm was definitely evident on tape. The problem with Bryce isn't necessarily the physical traits of throwing the football. It's reading defenses and getting all the little tiny nuances and subtleties down with throwing the football at the collegiate level. You wouldn't want Bryce to be running a super complicated West Coast offense with all kinds of different calls and all kinds of different language and all kinds of different, audibles you could go to and things like that. Well, the good thing about Jason Beck's offense is the passing game is relatively simple, but still effective. They're going to run loads of RPOs. And if you know anything about RPOs, instead of having to kind of read the entire field when it comes to the defense and look at things pre-snap and post-snap and try to really get a good picture of what all, 7 or 8 players in coverage on any given defense and any given alignment are going to do, the RPO, and this is why so many teams in college are running RPOs, by the way, especially with like the transfer portal and so many teams starting young freshmen these days. It takes a lot of time to learn a whole system. It doesn't take a lot of time to get RPOs down, because what they essentially do is really whittle the entire defense down, the entire play down to reading one defender, whether it be a linebacker or a safety or a nickel corner. That's really all Bryce will be responsible for in terms of pre-snap stuff on any given play, if they go the way that I think Jason Beck will and run a lot of RPOs. So instead of having to read like an entire defense, and I'm sure that they will have a drop back passing game, don't get me wrong, every team does. No team is like exclusively RPO, so he's still going to have to learn, and that's definitely something that I want him to do. But on a lot of passing plays, it's going to be simplified for him. It's going to be identify the read player, identify the guy with leverage, read him out. Is he crashing down to spill the run, or is he staying back in coverage? Bing, bang, boom. Throw the lookie behind the will linebacker, the slant. Most people call it a lookie with an RPO. Don't ask me why. This is what a lot of people call it. Or hit the tight end out in the flat because the linebacker didn't carry him as he motioned into the flat. Instead, he bit on the run action, and now you have your tight end open in the flat on like a, Y flat RPO option play. It's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff. It's going to be simplified in a way for Bryce Underwood, and I think it can be effective, especially against some of the defenses Michigan has to face this season. And then my last point, the one thing you should really look out for with Jason Beck's offense is kind of the use of pre-snap motion. And now it's easy to just say, oh yeah, they're going to use motion and it's going to be great because, if you watch like CBS NFL Sundays, you'll hear Tony Romo talk over and over and over again about how great it is to use pre-snap motion because it shows you what kind of coverage the defense is in. Well, it's not necessarily the only reason why you motion, and it's especially not necessarily the only reason why you would motion guys like tight ends and running backs and things like that. Yes, motioning wide receivers across the formation is important, and that will certainly help Bryce out a bit as well. And I'm highlighting all of this, of course, because this is stuff that Jason Beck does frequently, and I love it, and that's why I think this offense will be great this next season. There'll be a lot more pre-snap motion. We didn't see much of it at all last season. Chip Lindsey really disappointed me personally with how stagnant the offense was in a lot of the pre-play stuff. If you look, Michigan was one of the most stagnant offenses when it came to what they did pre-snap, and it really bothered me because any modern offense would frequently put a guy in motion to at least get an idea of what the coverage is. Michigan's going to do a lot of that this season with their wide receivers, motioning them across the formation, going from inside to outside, things like that, closer to the formation to being really wide out by the numbers and all that kind of stuff to get an idea for Bryce of what the coverage is going to be. What they're also going to do, and what I also saw in Utah's film, is that they're going to be motioning their tight ends around. They're going to start out in line and motion out. They're going to motion the running backs around. And what that really does is creates those mismatches, especially when they see a little bit of man coverage. And Bryce Underwood can then get those cues as to where to go with the ball post-snap. And we didn't really see a lot of that last season. Again, we didn't see a lot of motioning, period. But I like the way that they motion in this offense. It's not just like motioning a wide receiver across just to get the coverage read and then bing, bang, boom. You call the play, you snap the ball, and you try to get an idea of where to go with it. Expect guys like Zach Marshall and Hogan Hansen to also be motioning around. Expect guys like Savion Hyder, who already has shown his ability to catch the football out of the backfield, to motion in and out sometimes and things like that. They're going to use a lot more of that than they did in the previous regime. And then there's going to be, and you should definitely look out for this, I think a wider array of personnel groupings than we've seen in previous seasons. And that really speaks to the personnel that Jason Beck has at his fingertips. He's going to be able to do that because this Michigan roster, at least in terms of the offense, is probably deeper than it has been in a few years. We all know the wide receiver room has improved. They also have guys like Jalen Hoffman at their disposal, kind of a fullback, flex Y tight end. If they need him to do that. He can catch the ball a little bit, but he also is a great blocker. They got guys like Eli Owens on roster who can also do a little bit of that. They got Zach Marshall, who can be a great inline tight end, who's a good blocking tight end, but also a good receiving tight end. They got Hogan Hansen. They've got a lot of different options when it comes to their personnel groupings. They could even run some 2 running back sets, which is something that I saw in the film with Utah last season too. Like, you could legitimately make an argument for occasionally running Hyder and Marshall out there to do some really interesting stuff. So all very, very exciting stuff. And if it all goes well, if everything clicks, and especially if Bryce Underwood improves, I really think this could be a top 10 unit in the entire country, in the entire sport. That's the ceiling for this team. I really, really like the fit. Again, fitting with Michigan's identity, continuing that kind of tradition of having that, kind of blue collar work ethic, toughness, and physicality, while also being a little more finesse in some ways, which is what you really need to win in modern college football. That's going to do it for this video. Really, really appreciate the support we've gotten, guys. By the way, we're up over 300 subscribers now, which is crazy to me. We've only had like 12 or 13 videos so far. That's an honor, frankly. I really appreciate it. If you guys haven't subscribed already, please do help us get, to our goal of 1,000 subscribers soon. That would be great. And like the video, all that good stuff. Join our Discord. The link will be in the comments. It will be pinned in the comments. There's a great little community over there. And until next time, as always, be kind to other people out there.